My name is Megan Briggs, and on the night this happened, I was 29 and still naive enough to think Christmas dinner might finally be normal. I should have known better. My sister sat across from me, watching every move I made like she'd been waiting all year for this one moment. There was that little curl at the corner of her mouth, the smug, almost smile she wears when she thinks she's already won. She lifted her glass, glanced at me, and said, "The family voted. You're not really part of this family anymore." I watched my mother look down at her plate, my father stare straight ahead, and cousins try not to choke on their laughter. They treated it like a holiday game, like my life was a joke they could clap for and then forget. I didn't ask when this vote happened or who raised their hands. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I just let the words sink in, let the laughter roll over me, and felt something very quiet inside me finally click into place. So I nodded, pushed my chair back, and stood up from that table. Nobody took me seriously at first. They thought I was being dramatic, stepping away for air, maybe heading to the bathroom to cry and then come back. They had no idea that the second I stood up, the rules of that house stopped applying to me, and something they cared about slipped out of their control. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. Leaving the table was the easiest part. I walked down the short hallway toward the back of the house, heels silent on the tile, my heart strangely steady. For 29 years I had played along with their version of family, absorbing every jab and backhanded comment because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped cooperating. Tonight, my sister, Brandy Nolan, finally said out loud what they had all acted like for years. And the odd thing was, I felt calmer than I ever had at that table. In the small guest room where I had dropped my coat earlier, I closed the door and took my phone out. The lock screen was still lit from the notification I had seen under the table when she spoke. A week before Christmas, I had moved the savings that were in my name out of the joint family emergency account and into a separate account the bank opened just for me. The only thing left tied to that account was my name and my authorization. I had been waiting to finish one last step. My thumb hovered over the banking app for a second. Then I signed in and scrolled to the account my parents loved to call ours, even though most of the deposits had come from me working overtime and picking up freelance projects on the side. With 3 taps, I removed my authorization, set the account to close, and confirmed that any remaining balance would move to my personal account within the next business day. The confirmation banner slid across my screen, a simple line of text that felt like a steel door clanging shut. I did not smile. I did not cry. I just slipped the phone back into my pocket and smoothed my dress, as if I had only fixed my makeup. In the kitchen, I could hear my mother's voice rise a little as she fiddled with the dishes, pretending everything was fine. My father's deeper tone cut in, and then there was a beat of silence followed by the sharp, confused questions that always come when money stops behaving the way people expect it to. Somewhere between the clatter of plates and the muffled sound of my name, I knew the email I had scheduled to my attorney, Andrew Wallace, had also left my outbox. I had written it that morning, stating in plain language that if my family publicly disowned me at dinner, I wanted to proceed with removing myself from anything they controlled or could use to reach me. All he needed as proof was my confirmation that it had happened. On the screen, it was just a confirmation number and a line of text. But to me, it was proof that I could step out of a role they had written for me without asking anyone's permission. I thought about the nights I had picked up extra shifts so that account would stay padded, the way my parents had bragged about having a safety net while reminding me it meant I owed them my presence at every holiday. They had turned my effort into a leash. Closing it was the first time I had used money to protect myself instead of to buy their approval. When I cracked the door open and stepped back into the hallway, the noise in the house had changed. A notification chimed from the kitchen, another from the dining room, followed by an uneasy pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. I did not need to see their faces to know the tone at the table had shifted from carefree to calculating. Questions would already be flying, voices rising, everyone trying to figure out what I had done and how quickly they could undo it. I did not stay to listen. I reached for my coat, wrapped it around my shoulders, and walked out to my car with my keys already in my hand. The porch light threw a pale circle over the concrete as I stepped outside. The neighborhood was quiet, that desert kind of quiet where a single car on the highway sounds too loud. My hands shook, not with panic but with something closer to relief, as if my body finally understood I was done performing. I looked at the house just long enough to see it for what it was. A place where every visit had a cost, where I kept paying in silence for a belonging that never arrived. Walking toward my car, I knew that when I stood up from that table, the deal I had been living under had already ended. I unlocked the driver's door, slid inside, and let the frame of the car swallow the last of the noise. Their voices were still faint through the glass, sharp and frantic, already circling around what I might have done. I started the engine and pulled away, watching the porch light shrink in the rearview until it was just another dot in the dark. By the time sunlight pushed through the blinds of my tiny apartment, the peace I had felt in the car was gone, replaced by the relentless buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. It vibrated again and again until it nearly slid off the edge, the screen lighting up with missed calls stacked on top of each other. Mom, Dad, Brandy. Unknown numbers I knew were relatives, all with the same urgency, all acting like they had not laughed when my existence got put up for a vote. I let the calls roll to voicemail until the notifications blurred together. The messages came next. Paragraphs of guilt dressed up as concern, accusations hidden inside questions, reminders that it was Christmas and that I was ruining the day for everyone. They wrote as if I had started everything, as if what happened at the table had been some harmless joke I should have taken better. I read every word, not because they deserved my attention, but because I wanted a record. Screenshots stacked in my gallery, each one a small piece of proof that I was not imagining the way they twisted reality. There was a time when messages like that would have sent me spiraling, pacing around my place, and wondering what I could apologize for to make the discomfort stop. That version of me had sat at their table every year, trying to earn a seat that was technically already mine. The more I scrolled, the easier it became to see the pattern. Every line circled back to the same idea. I was responsible for their happiness, even when they were the ones cutting me out. They reminded me of favors they had done, rides they had given, holidays they had hosted, like a running tab of debt I was supposed to pay with gratitude and compliance. None of it mentioned the extra hours I had worked to keep that family emergency account full, or the way they loved to talk about it like some shared treasure they had built together. Around midday, my best friend Corey Lane texted to ask how dinner had gone. I stared at his name for a moment before replying that I was free to meet, which was easier than explaining through a screen that my family had decided I was optional. We met at a diner off the main road, the kind of place with vinyl booths, coffee that never tasted quite fresh, and a constant hum of other people's conversations that made it easier to talk without feeling watched. Corey slid into the booth across from me and waited while I laid out the pieces of the night in order, not dramatizing them, not downplaying them either. I told him about the vote, the laughter, the way no one stepped in to say it had gone too far. I described what I had done in the guest room, how the confirmation message on my phone had felt more solid than anything anyone at that table had ever promised me. He let me empty it all out, hands around his mug, eyes steady, not flinching when I said the part where my sister told me I didn't belong. When he finally answered, his voice stayed level. He did not tell me to calm down or to call them back. He did not tell me I was overreacting. He pointed to what was in front of us, The long line of messages on my phone that shifted from affectionate to aggressive the second they realized something had changed. To him, it was simple. People who vote you out of their family do not get to decide how close they stand to your life afterward. He asked what I wanted to do next, not what I thought they would accept. The question sat between us longer than the steam rising from his coffee. For the first time, I answered honestly. I told him I was tired of playing peacekeeper in a house where peace depended on my silence. I was done treating my boundaries like negotiable suggestions. I wanted every unspoken rule they had used to keep me in place to turn into an actual line they could not cross without consequences. On my phone, the email I had scheduled to my attorney had already left hours ago. All it needed now was a follow-up from me confirming that the line had been crossed exactly the way I said it would be. After I left the diner, I sat in my parked car for a while and drafted that confirmation, each sentence clear and unembellished. I described what my sister had said, how the rest of the table reacted, and the messages that arrived afterward. I attached the screenshots, watched the files load, and hit send. When the message disappeared from my outbox, I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and leaned back. The calls still came in waves for the rest of the day, but I let them pass untouched. They could fill my voicemail with apologies or threats or some clumsy mix of both. I did not answer a single one. That night, I switched my phone to silent and left it in a drawer across the room. The screen still glowed through the thin gap every few minutes, a dull pulse reminding me they were scrambling to drag me back into the orbit I had finally stepped out of. I lay awake longer than I wanted, not because I was scared of what would happen, but because the quiet felt unfamiliar. For once, I was not rehearsing apologies or bargaining with myself. I had taken one clean step away, and the evidence of it was already moving without me. A few days later, I sat in a quiet office far from the strip, in a chair that felt more solid than any seat at my parents' table. The blinds were half closed against the Nevada sun, turning the room into a place where people dealt with things they could not fix at home. I had sent my email, attached my screenshots, and now I was here to find out what cutting ties would actually look like. The man across from me introduced himself as Andrew Wallace, my attorney, but he already knew most of the story. He had read everything before I walked in. On his desk, my file sat clipped together, the printed screenshots tucked behind my written summary. He did not question whether something had happened. He focused on what could be done about it, which made it easier to breathe. He started with every place my name was tied to my family's finances or logistics. There was the emergency account I had already moved to close, the one they liked to display as proof of how responsible we all were. There was the cell phone line still on my parents' plan, the one my mother brought up whenever she wanted leverage. There were old hospital forms where I had listed my parents as emergency contacts and decision-makers, because at the time I had not imagined needing anyone else. Andrew explained that none of this made them my owners. These were connection points they had learned to tug on whenever they felt me slipping away. One by one, he outlined how to remove or replace each tie. I could move my phone onto my own plan, update medical forms, change the mailing address attached to my records so that nothing important landed in their mailbox. The steps sounded tedious, but tedious felt manageable. It was still better than living on a leash. Then he turned to something I had almost forgotten. Years ago, when my grandparents were still alive, my father had talked about a small fund set aside for future family needs. It was modest, nowhere near the kind of wealth families go to court over, but it existed. My aunt, Eileen, had been appointed to help oversee it with my father. Back then it felt distant, like an abstract safety net that might never touch my life. Andrew had obtained the paperwork before our meeting. As he described it, my name appeared not as someone expecting to cash in, but as a potential beneficiary, and as a person whose information had been used when the account was updated. No one had ever told me that piece. They had folded my identity into something they controlled together, then used that invisible connection as another reason I owed them loyalty. Hearing it laid out in calm legal language made their stunt at dinner look even uglier. They wanted the theatrics of voting me out while still keeping my name handy wherever it made things easier. They had treated belonging like a prop, not a responsibility. Andrew went through my options without pushing me. I could formally request to be removed as a beneficiary if that was what I wanted. I could document that certain uses of my information had never been explained to me. I could refuse any future involvement with that fund. None of it was about punishing them. It was about drawing a line that did not depend on their mood. I thought about my sister's practiced smile, the way she had delivered the line about the family vote as if she were hosting a show. I saw my parents' faces around the table, the quick calculation behind their eyes, the almost amused approval from Aunt Eileen at the end of the room. For years, they had counted on me to absorb the impact of choices I never agreed to. Sitting in that office, I realized I did not owe them another inch of my life. Not my savings, not my records, not my future place in a plan they refused to explain. For once, I was not asking how far they would let me go. I was deciding how close I wanted them to stand. By the time I finished answering Andrew's questions, a stack of forms sat between us. They were not dramatic. They did not shout. They simply redirected where certain responsibilities and rights would go from now on. I read every line before I signed, letting the pen move slowly, feeling each signature settle into the paper like an anchor. When we were done, he slid copies into a plain folder and handed it to me. The folder felt heavier than it looked when I tucked it under my arm and stood up. Outside, the desert air hit my face, dry and sharp. This time, I was not walking away from people who had decided I did not belong. I was walking toward a life where they no longer got to vote on whether I stayed. 2 weeks later, I walked into a room I had chosen, not one they owned. I sent a single group message with the details. I wrote that there were things they needed to hear from me in person, and that, if they wanted to listen, they could meet me in a private room at a restaurant outside the city. No apology, no plea for peace. Just a time and a place. Their replies landed within minutes. My mother said she was glad I was ready to talk like family again. My father sent a short confirmation that sounded more like a notice than a question. My sister, Brandy Nolan, answered with one thumbs-up emoji. Aunt Eileen added that it was time I stopped making such a big deal out of one evening. In the days before the dinner, I did not rehearse arguments. I checked the practical work instead. The documents Andrew Wallace had prepared sat in a plain folder on my counter, with copies stored where only I could reach them. Seeing my name in clear, quiet print did more to steady me than any imagined speech. The restaurant sat at the edge of a shopping center near the highway. Inside, a server led me through the crowded dining area to a room behind a glass door. The door softened the noise outside into a low, steady hum. I chose the seat facing the entrance, set the folder on the table, and laid my phone beside it with the screen turned down. I arrived early so I would be settled before they walked in. Beyond the glass, strangers lifted glasses and leaned into their own stories. Plates, drinks, easy laughter. For once, I did not feel like someone waiting to be called in and judged. I felt like the one who had called the meeting. My parents entered first. My mother stepped through the doorway with careful posture, her expression arranged somewhere between hurt and hope. My father followed, shoulders tight, eyes landing on the folder before they reached my face. They greeted me politely and sat across from me, leaving a thin strip of distance between their hands and the edge of the papers. Brandy arrived a few moments later. She moved with the relaxed confidence of someone used to arriving last and still being the center of attention. Her gaze flicked to the folder, then to my hands, before that small, knowing curve appeared at the corner of her mouth. She chose a seat slightly off to the side, close enough to watch everything yet angled away from our parents. Aunt Eileen came in last. She entered with the calm weight of a person who believes she speaks for the family. Her greeting to my parents and to Brandy was warm. When she turned to me, her smile thinned and her glance dropped straight to the folder. She took a chair with a clear view of my side of the table. When the server left water on the table and slid the glass door mostly shut, the room shrank around the silence. The restaurant noise faded to a murmur behind the wall. No one reached for a menu. No one asked how my life had been since they last saw me. They were not here to know me. They were here to find out whether I would bend. I rested my hands together and waited. My mother began talking in the same tone she had used after every argument when I was younger. She spoke about tension and stress, about people saying things they do not mean, about how the holidays bring out the worst in everyone. She called Christmas a night that got out of hand, as if the problem had been volume, not content. My father nodded in the right places and added a line about wanting peace. Neither of them repeated the words from the table at their house. They did not mention a vote. They did not mention telling me I was not really part of the family while everyone else laughed. Brandy spoke next. She described the entire scene as a joke that had landed badly, the kind of teasing siblings are supposed to shrug off. She said she had expected me to roll my eyes and throw a comment back at her, not walk out and stop answering calls. In her version, what she did was playful. What I did afterward was the real offense. Listening to them, I heard the old pattern settle into place. Their choices shrank while my reaction expanded in their retelling. The weight of the story slid from their side of the table onto mine, as if I had written the line that pushed me away instead of just hearing it. This time, I did not move to close the gap for them. I let their explanations trail off and sit in the air between us. When the room finally went quiet and there was nothing left for them to hide behind, I reached for the folder and lifted it from the table, feeling its solid edge press into my palms. The folder sat between us like a line drawn on the table. Its thin cardboard edge pressed against my fingers as I set it down again. No one reached for their water. No one shifted in their chair. The air inside that glass-walled room felt tight enough to touch. I opened the folder and let the pages fan out. Plain white paper, clean black ink, my name printed exactly as it appears on my license. Not a speech, not a threat, just the written shape of decisions I had already made. For years I had hidden anything that might upset them. Today, the evidence sat in front of all of us. I slid one set of copies toward my parents. Another set stopped in front of the space between Brandy and Aunt Eileen. The motion alone sharpened their expressions. They had come ready for emotion, not documentation. They had prepared themselves to outtalk me, not to see their control translated into forms and signatures. The first pages laid out the changes to the account they called ours. My authorization had been removed. The closure already in process. The remaining balance directed to an account only I could touch. Another section explained that my phone and records were no longer tied to their address or their billing. The small family fund my father liked to mention was listed with a clear note beside my name. No future involvement, no expectation, no consent to be used as leverage. Their eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed as they reached the parts that mattered to them. My mother's fingers hovered near a paragraph and then retreated, as if touching it might make it more real. My father's jaw tightened when he reached the statement confirming that I could not be contacted through any shared financial channels. Color drained from Aunt Eileen's face when she saw her name and my father's paired together on the oversight line for the fund. I let the silence stretch. Every flicker across their faces told me what I needed to know. For once, I did not rush in to soften anything. I did not offer comfort for a situation they had created. A few moments later, the door opened and Andrew Wallace stepped inside. I had asked him to arrive after I put the papers down, and he did exactly that, moving with the calm of someone who spends his life explaining consequences. He greeted the group, took the empty chair near the door, and set his briefcase by his feet. He did not raise his voice. He did not push. He simply went through the documents in front of them, confirming that the changes were already underway. The emergency account would no longer involve me. My phone and records were being updated. Any attempt to use my name or information without my permission would be treated as a formal issue, not a family misunderstanding. Hearing it in his neutral tone made the whole thing feel different from every fight I had ever had with them. There was no room to argue about who remembered what. There were records, signatures, timestamps. What had been a private pattern of pressure was now something that existed on paper where other people could see it. My mother wanted to know why I had gone this far instead of sitting down with them first. My father focused on what this meant for the fund he had always spoken about like a promise. Aunt Eileen tried to claim she had only ever done what was best for everyone. Brandy stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the lines of text, her confidence thinning at the edges. I answered in short, clear pieces. I told them I was finished living in a system where my value depended on how much disrespect I could absorb. I told them I would not be available through money, paperwork, or obligation. I did not list every slight or repeat the words spoken at their house. The documents were enough. What unsettled them most was not the detail of any single form. It was the fact that all of this had happened without their approval. The vote my sister had bragged about at Christmas had been the last time they would stand in a circle and decide my place. From here on out, those decisions were out of their hands. Sitting at that table, I felt something shift inside my chest. The room still hummed with discomfort, but it no longer felt like it was pressing me down. The weight of keeping everyone else comfortable had finally slid back to the people who had been holding the power all along. When the server knocked gently on the glass and asked if we needed anything else, I gathered the remaining copies, slipped them back into the folder, and rested my hands on top of it. The meeting had done what I needed it to do. The lines I could live with were on the page, and they were not going anywhere. In the weeks after that meeting, life rearranged itself in small, quiet ways. The first change was silence. Not the shocked kind from the restaurant, but a slower one that settled over my days as I stopped reacting to every vibration of my phone. Calls and messages still came at first. I let them pile up. The few I opened sounded less like apologies and more like attempts to reset the story. They wanted explanations for the papers and for my decisions. They wanted me back in the loop where they talked, and I tried to prove that what I felt was real. The wording slid from concern to pressure, from vague worry to statements about me breaking the family. I had seen that pattern for years. I did not write a long reply. I sent one short message saying that any further contact had to go through Andrew Wallace's office. No more direct calls, no surprise visits, no speeches at my door. If they wanted something, they would have to ask in a place where someone else could see the shape of it. After that, the volume dropped. A few relatives reached through social media with bright notes that pretended nothing had happened at Christmas. I let those sit. I was finished smoothing the edges of other people's choices just because we shared a last name. Before the month ended, I changed my number. I updated my address with the people who needed it. Work, my doctor, my bank, a small circle of friends. I did not send that information to anyone who had been at the table when my sister said I did not belong. News of my family came back in fragments. A cousin mentioned that my parents argued more, that gatherings felt tense, without someone else to absorb the blame when things went sideways. Without me there, their frustration had nowhere familiar to land. My sister's version of being the responsible one was harder to sell when there was no quiet sibling to cast as the problem. Aunt Eileen's voice carried less weight when people finally asked who she was speaking for. None of that felt like a victory. Watching them struggle under the weight of their own choices did not make me happy. They had built a version of family that depended on having someone at the center of their ridicule. For a long time, that someone had been me. My life did not turn into a highlight reel. Bills still arrived. Work still left me tired. Some mornings I woke with a knot in my chest, hearing the echo of their laughter. The difference was that I no longer walked into rooms where the people who caused that ache could rewrite what they had done while I sat quietly nearby. Distance did not erase the past, but it made space for something else to grow around it. I built new routines that did not revolve around their expectations. Dinners with friends who listened, weekends that ended without anyone exploding because they felt ignored, evenings where nothing dramatic happened, and that was the point. I started to believe that a calm life did not mean I was failing. It meant I was finally safe. Sometimes I still think about the moment my sister stood at the head of that table and said the family had voted and I was no longer part of it. There was a time when that sentence would have defined me. Now I see it as the moment that showed me who they were. I did not lose a real family that night. I walked away from an audience that only knew how to clap when someone else was being humiliated. If there is anything I hope you take from this, it is that you are not required to stay in places where your worth is measured by how quietly you endure being hurt. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up from the table and let the room rearrange itself without you. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If any part of it made you think about your own boundaries or the people you call family, feel free to share where you are listening from and what it brought up for you. Wherever you are, I hope you find a place where no one ever has to vote on whether you deserve to be there.